5 seconds to submergence. Submergence deep into the absurd.
Wait.
Okay. No. All right. So yeah, we actually like deleted the first part. I was like, you know what? Let's just can it. Let's just can it. But anyways, Into the Absurd is back. It's been like 3 weeks or 4 weeks. I don't know. I've been kind of busy, so I just haven't really I'm gonna be honest, I haven't put a whole lot of effort into it the past 3 weeks just because I've been working and
Well, you don't have to let people know that.
yeah, but you know what? You know what? Whatever.
Oh, no. It's good though. No, it's good. You're being
It's all good.
honest.
I'm just
You know,
trying to
no,
be
no. Let's
honest
say,
and sincere
yeah.
to these
Let's say
people.
it's a good example. It's a good example saying, you know what, I kind of sucked lately. I apologize for sucking.
Yeah.
We've all been there, right? Like
Mm.
it's it's a
But I've been
necessary
eating
part
a
of
lot
life.
of chips and salsa lately because my girlfriend just learned how to make salsa and it is phenomenal. It's amazing.
Yeah,
Uh,
and then like some salsa. I eat that stuff with the spoon.
yeah. So anyways, the fundamental law of eternal recurrence has demanded that Mynaa Miesnowan returns to Into the Absurd. And we will be doing a 2 to 4 part series, however long it takes, to kind of dissect and discuss Ralph Waldo Emerson's essay, Self-Reliance. So thanks for coming on again, Mynaa. Thanks for being ready to discuss Emerson's, like, just his will, his being, how he has presented himself in what year? 1843 is when he wrote
18,
this.
18, 1841. Yeah,
1841.
and thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. So I will begin. We're kind of like, we're not 100% sure how we're going to do it yet, but essentially, Mynaa went through the trouble and the hard work and labor to annotate the whole essay. And what we're going to do is we'll probably like read off like a paragraph and dissect that paragraph, and then kind of just go into it. And then if we go on a tangent, that's just
Yeah,
that is
don't try
exactly
reading along.
what we have willed into being. So without further ado, here you go. I read the other day some verses written by an eminent painter which were original and not conventional. The soul always hears an admonition in such lines. Let the subject be what it may. The sentiment they instill is of more value than any thought they may contain. To believe our own thought, to believe that what is true for you is your private heart, is true for all men, that is genius. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense. For the inmost in due time becomes the outmost, and our first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. Familiar as the voice of the mind is to each, the highest merit we ascribe to Moses, Plato, and Milton is that they set at naught books and traditions, and spoke not what men, but what they thought. Not what men, but what they thought. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the lustre of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought, because it is his. In every work of genius we recognize majesty. Great works of art have no more affecting lesson for us than this. They teach us to abide by our spontaneous impression with good-humored inflexibility than most when the whole cry of voices is on the other side. Else, tomorrow a stranger will say, with masterly good sense, precisely what we have thought and felt all the time. And we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another. I kind of sense a little bit of like, till I know you were telling me about fate and destiny, I kind of sense that like fate there, where he says, where is it? Else tomorrow a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have thought and felt all the time.
Yeah, that's one of the most telling lines in the entire first paragraph here.
And what does that tell us?
Well, it definitely jumps ahead of the rest. But if we go straight to the point, okay, actually, no, let's go up to the top, because it starts with, he tells you the anecdote, right? I heard what this
Yeah.
eminent painter said. He says, the soul always hears an admonition in such lines. So, this is the first and the last, right? Like the last sentiment echoes this first one right here.
Yeah.
The soul always hears an admonition in such lines. Let the subject be what it may. The sentiment they instill is of more value than any thought they may contain. So again, he's talking about sentiments, sentiments being, even though words, definitions, cultures, values, all of these things that go in together to shape these things, and thus shape us as sentient beings, if you will, right? Whatever our conceptions of sentient may be.
You're saying that all these things in our life, all these whatever you'll call them, whatever, say, Zap will call them, like distraction, isolation, sublimation, right? Anchoring, like all these things are kind of what shape us into these sentient beings.
Right. Well, here's a question for you, right? Let me ask you this actually here from the outset.
Yeah.
How much of you is, and maybe maybe like somewhere we might have addressed this before, but like how much of you is you, right? From a kid, you were marketed to. From a kid, you were taught by others. From a kid, you were, someone else gave you your name. Someone else delivered you into this world and someone else's hospital. All these things came to pass, but you didn't get a say or a choice in any of them.
Yeah. It is, well, so there I kind of have to say, because my dad, he told me once that I shouldn't ever feel sorry for anyone. And in a sense, I agree with him. But in a sense, I disagree with him, because I told him that, Dad, you don't choose where you're born. You don't choose what family or what life you're born into. And that's, in a sense, because I'm more fortunate than most people, probably more fortunate than more than most people. I felt, at least when I was younger, and occasionally now, that I feel sorry for other people. And this, in a sense, me feeling sorry for other people is a byproduct of my own fate, of my own position, of my own being someone who I didn't choose to be.
So you're saying the world instilled pity in you?
I guess so.
It's a loaded topic. People get afraid, when you talk about stuff like this.
Yes, but we can go back to that later. Perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. No. There's a time. No, he addresses it. We're gonna get to it. Like it's in the essay. That's actually just a few paragraphs. That's maybe like halfway down. So.
You ever watch Vsauce?
That'll be fun.
Like the YouTube channel.
He's a science guy, right?
Yeah. He kind of. I mean, mainly philosophy. I mean, he goes, well, yeah, like science, but he's kind of at the gateway between science and philosophy and psychology.
Okay.
And he just has like extremely interesting videos. He goes like all off on tangents. I mean, he's probably like the originator of the podcast. Well, not really, but his sort of like that tangentially sort of the way that he goes about his YouTube videos is very just like pristine. You should check it out. But he goes into that in this one video called like "What is Real?" Right? He goes into this concept of, okay, well, like what is real? Like who am I? Like how can I possibly prove that I exist outside my own head? Right? And I'm thinking about this and how it relates to your question. Like what, like how much of me is me, right? Like with all these things that have created me and all these things that have brought me into being, like how much of me is me? Like how much of this being a self or being real, right?
Well, sure, but okay, let's because you got to stand somewhere, right? Like in essence, right? It's not like you can try and do away with the rules, let's say, like, but if you don't look both ways crossing the street, it's not a conceptual result. It's I think it's a matter of asking the right questions and, seeking after the right, because I'd say so much of philosophy and otherwise, it's, you're asking questions that, it's like, well, if you're dying, like you don't have time to be over here. Like there's other more important things, or there's other more important questions or problems that need to be solved. Maybe is a better way of looking at it. But again, like, okay, how much of you is marketed? How much of it was taught in school? It's the difference between like what is actually you, which would be your will, let's say, and the will of those around you who have shaped you.
But it's also not just the people around you that have shaped you. It's
the
because things have shaped
ages.
them, right? And things have shaped the things that we have in our society, the whole structure of our society. I mean, 1776, like we have the Constitution, right? And that's 150 years, or like 225 years or whatever back in time, that have shaped the entire society that we live in.
Right. And that was shaped by events in Europe and otherwise, before that.
Yes.
Right. It's been ongoing it's been moving in this direction for a while.
I mean, for an eternity.
Yeah. I mean, if you're talking about evolution, it tumbled out like this, and then it kind of tells you that if you're if we have these senses that evolved to take in this information, then that's it almost seems like it tells you that was an inevitability.
Yeah.
Right. Because it happened. Well, wasn't it inevitable then? Because it's not that it didn't happen, and it's not that something else happened. It's that this specific thing happened.
Yeah.
Right. It is the way it is. We can question and posit otherwise, whether it's going like, okay, what would a Western culture look like without a Christian trajectory versus, whatever it may be. But here we are. Speaking of which, so this is an admonition of that, right? So, So here's an admonition. And why is that? It's like, well, there he is. The artist is the one basically doing what Emerson explains at the end there.
Yeah.
Tomorrow a stranger will say with masterly good sense precisely what we have thought and felt all the time, and we shall be forced to take with shame our own opinion from another, right? I thought to say that, but I didn't. I could have opened my mouth. I could have stood up. I could have protected myself. I could have protected them, right? It could be any number of things how this plays out.
It's almost like envy.
Oh, what's funny? Oh, we're about to. He gets into that.
It's like, soon. Well, it's like, oh, they got to it before me. They said,
well, I mean, well, depending on what that is, like, I imagine you might be carrying some regrets with you for the rest of your life. I'd hate to be in that position. Never want to be in that position.
Especially if they made it just the day before you were about to publish and then you read it.
What's that?
If, like, say I'm a writer.
Oh, okay, right? Gotcha. Yeah.
And then say I have the same ideas as Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'm like almost the same person. And then
damn, 1841, you beat me.
Yeah. He publishes this thing, like on Tuesday of 1841 on like some month. I don't know when he published it. And then, I come in on Wednesday and like I'm just about to go see the publisher. Then I see it. I see his work, it's just sitting around. I'm like, oh, Self-Reliance. And then I start reading it, and then I'm thinking, wait a minute, this sounds a lot like what I just wrote. This is almost exactly what I just wrote. And then you're just thinking, oh no, this stranger just said with masterly good sense precisely what I have thought and felt the whole time, right? And I'm forced to feel shame with my own opinion, with like taking my own opinion from another person. In a sense.
Right. So if we turn this into a fable, then the moral of the story is strike while the iron's hot, don't hide. Don't fawn, don't
but you'll have to start a new fire.
Right. But I mean, I guess that's a lot of this has to do with the mask, right? The mask that we all wear, let's say, or that people wear, because I like Gurdjieff's conception of the persona. he thought basically everything instilled in us, he saw that as all persona, it seems, if I'm not mistaken, if I recall, because it's been a while since I've read his stuff. But it seemed like for the most part, like that was his conception. And if that's true, then it's like, well, then where are you? It's like if everything school taught you, and if everything, because Emerson gets into this, but I'll put it on the forefront now. It's like, look, all those ancient Greeks, it's like they didn't need to read 2,000 years of history, right? They didn't need to, go to college and or in the same manner and then have all the same modern luxuries and to come up with what they did, and to to answer their own questions in life and to achieve what they wanted to achieve and to do whatever it is they wanted to do, and it's hard because it's like, would have like that it's contingent, not no matter how much you want to orient a system, it's like, it's either like people, it's either in people or it's not. It's either brought to light or it's not. And it's, nourished by others or it's not.
Yes.
These are kind of like back to the notion of, again, you got to stand somewhere, right? So
yeah,
if you're trying to do anything in this life, right? Like nothing that you can do here is easy. And it's a waste of one's, foolishness or educational opportunity to think otherwise.
Yeah.
Or to maybe think about, if you think about giving up on things before you ever even start, or
that's kind of
not bothering, or because everything about this is about the kind of lack of it's a lack of self-confidence, right? And it's a lack of self-trust, and it's obvious as to why it's there, because when the whole point of it's ironic in a country like America where we pride ourselves on freedom and bravery, and it's like, well, everyone's beholden to not just a two-party system, but all these other mass forces, from media to the government itself, which what is it other than a mass of blind wills, right? Because if you ask me, like, who's behind the curtain, like, could you tell me? Like, who's behind the curtain? What's really going on back there? I don't know that anyone actually has an answer for you.
Well, who's behind the curtain? Like, I could tell you, thousands upon thousands of people, and
wouldn't you say millions?
Billions. The whole history of humanity is behind that curtain. The whole history of the Earth is behind that curtain.
Right. Don't look at who's pulling the strings.
Yeah, well, like,
this gets into, like, Nietzsche's How the True World Became a Fable.
Yeah.
Which, like, Nietzsche reads like I guess, this actually, we're getting ahead of ourselves, but Emerson mentions the Alexandrian stanza, and when Nietzsche says how the true world became a fable, he's talking about how, you can look at it both ways, how the realization of this air that made us believe in these things was that we once believed in a true world that the philosophers and the religious teachers taught us how we were going to get there, right? Like, follow me, listen to me, do as I say, do as I do. You're like a block of wood, and I'm molding you and I'm shaping you, whether you realize that or not.
Yeah.
And you'd say of all the most profound thinkers, it's like you can't encounter them without them shaping you. It goes in one direction. Again, Emerson talks about this too. That's he says, we'll probably not get to that today. But he says, he's he's talking about children, and he says, he courts you, you don't court him, right? It's not the other way around.
Could you elaborate?
And maybe we should just keep moving, and we'll get there when we get there.
All right.
But because it's good, but we'll let it be for now. It's a good It's a good point to elaborate, but we'll get there. It's unavoidable in the course of events. It's in this essay.
So shall I read the next paragraph of the essay?
Let's see. It's a short one.
Okay. There is a time in every man's education when he arrives at the conviction that envy is ignorance, that imitation is suicide, that he must take himself for better, for worse, as his portion, that though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through his toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him to till.
Wow, so that's potent, right?
That's like the conclusion of the former paragraph, but it has that biblical sort of sense of, like, Adam, you're condemned to kill the earth for all of eternity, right?
Right. Yeah. It's even starts to sound like French philosophy, right? Like you're
Yeah.
doomed to freedom almost.
Hmm. Yes. And
Yeah, there's like
so like,
many ways.
but envy is ignorance, right? And that's kind of going back on the part where it's like to take with shame our own opinions from another. Like why? So like that right there is that like screams envy, right? And it's to take shame in our own opinion from another. That right there is ignorance. It doesn't really make sense to say like, it's like
Oh,
1841 on a Wednesday, and I just wrote Self-Reliance, but then I read Ralph Waldo's. It just got published yesterday on Tuesday, and now I'm just like, I feel so envious of him. And that right there is like pure ignorance.
right. Well, it's funny because the ignorance it's such a weird blind spot then, right? Because otherwise, if it's your opinion, what does it matter? Wouldn't you be happy to see yourself reflected in this world? Right? Because, you could say how many people feel like they don't, like, if they feel homeless in this world, or they feel like other people don't understand them, or they feel like, because depending on, well, if you're a Nietzsche, right, how much does the world understand you? If you're Ralph Waldo Emerson, let's say, right, I think, it's addressed directly and indirectly, and kind of works like this because
Yeah.
it's unavoidable.
And these men were,
I guess it's a weird thing because okay, maybe let me put it like this. This is important.
yeah.
That, if it's 1841 and, there's slavery and there's abolition and there's war and there's all the normal things going on and people have all their moral causes, they've always had them, right?
Yeah.
And like Emerson's over here, like by a little lake out in the middle of nowhere going, oh yeah, this is where I draw my line. How
Yeah.
many other people in America were just like, what is this guy on about? What's that have to
Yeah.
do with our wars and our atrocities and our problems and our economies and our,
Yeah.
like what the devil does self-reliance have to do with a government, right?
Mhm.
A large mass of wills.
Well, this kind of speaks to, well, like all these people who are reading his essay and saying, well, what does this have to do with me, right? They're essentially enslaved by their fate, right? They were forced to go to war. They're forced to work. They're forced to be a slave, say. They're forced to be whipped on a post. They're forced to go to law school by their parents and become the president of the United States or whatever, right? And they're like, maybe they hear this essay and like, oh, Ralph Waldo Emerson, that crazy guy by the lake, right? Like, what does he have to do to me? How will he help me, right?
Right. Well, I mean, that's the whole thing, right? Like, in that question right there, how can he help me? And maybe this is where Emerson says, pull your head out of your ass, pay
Yeah.
attention to what you're doing.
Mm.
Are you not, like, you're not aware of where you're at? You're not aware of what's taking place. You're not aware of what's going on around you.
Yeah.
Like you have no, I don't know, no bones in this, right? You have no interest in this, right? You have
Mm.
no say in this. Like, for all the talk of freedom and bravery, it's like when push comes to shove, you see that people, kind of like how Nietzsche words it, right? They seek to get out of the game then, right?
Mm.
And maybe this depends on temperament, right? Like if someone's a Gethian, which I guess if people need an example, it's like think of your Varys and your Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, right? That's kind of the Gethian, right? He kind of funds, he kind of whispers in people's ears, he kind of
Yes.
sets things in that kind of direction. And then you have the Rousseauians, right? Like the revolutionaries. And then, I guess you also, it's funny, these were Nietzsche's classification of philosophers. You also had Schopenhauerians, and maybe since then you could say Nietzscheans, but in a certain sense, like a Nietzschean isn't real, just like a Emersonian isn't real, just like you know what I mean? Like it's not,
Yeah.
it's more like let the best man win, rather than it is like come follow me. Because again, Emerson's like, I'm way over here
Yeah.
drawing this line, while the rest of you, and look, who, like, for all the rabble, it's like, yeah, we might have newspaper copies and this, that, and the other, but like no one remembers the masses from 1841.
Mm.
We remember like Frederick Douglass, we remember Henry David Thoreau, we remember Emerson, right? We remember all these
Yeah.
other people from that time period.
those people who practice self-reliance is the people that we remember.
Well, inevitably you have to. I mean, otherwise,
Yeah.
like, there's no greatness without it, right? Like if you there, because otherwise it literally means you're dependent. It means you've been dependent on everyone else and everything else, or dependent on someone or something else. It means you don't have thoughts or ideals or values of your own. You haven't created those for yourself, or you haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah. Well, it's like if you looked at a river, right, and it's constantly moving along, right?
Oh, you gonna say Heraclitus? There's no stepping into the river twice.
No.
Okay.
But say one little like circle of water just stopped moving. It just stayed still. Then everything else moved past it. You would look at that little circle of water and you would be entirely amazed. You cannot believe your eyes at what you just saw. And the whole river would completely dissipate in your mind because you wouldn't even be thinking about that anymore. You'd think about this little circle of water that completely defies gravity and all the laws of physics by just standing there and sitting there while all the other water just moves along it. And that's kind of how I think about when I think about these people like Nietzsche or Emerson or Frederick Douglass, right? These people who are sitting still in the water and being remembered by the people who walk in the
yes.
river.
No, that's a, no, it's a great metaphor.
Rather than moving along.
And it's ancient, and it exists amongst the Greeks, and it exists amongst those even further east, like in Asia, right? Like there's a lot of metaphors there with, the river of death sweeping people away. It's purported that the Buddha's last words were, "Be an island." And that's also reflected in, some of his first recorded teachings, which were all originally in Pali, and that was the Dhammapada, and that wasn't even, by all accounts, right? It was an oral tradition and wasn't written down for 500 years. So you're left to question how much changed. But regardless, if you read it, and I would say this: the different, like a lot of the Western translations, they completely lack the contextual stories of where these otherwise pithy little sayings come from, and then you're left to kind of read them with the same good and evil aspect of more Western tradition, because they have a lot of the same words, but they don't mean the same thing, and they're not referring to the same things a lot of the times. So but I mean, it's still there, right? He talks about this side of the shore, that side of the shore. This side of the shore, things are peaceful. That side of the shore, the people just run up and down.
And so here I can't help but to think of Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know if you've seen it. Kind of a silly example.
I've heard of it.
But so the main character in like the final season, the final episode, he defeats the antagonist, the Fire Lord, purely by self-reliance, by believing in himself. But not only that, he so just a little context. Everyone in this world, in this show, like they have like bending abilities to like bend water, or like move and control water, move and control fire, air, earth. And Aang, the last airbender, he defeats the Fire Lord by staying true to himself and like holding in that and being firm in his own beliefs and his own morals and his own idea of what is good or what is evil, or like what he believes is true or what he believes is right, by himself and for himself. He does that, and he kind of channels into that, and he takes away his powers, the Fire Lord's powers, right? He takes away his ability to bend fire. And I think of that in the way that, like, when these people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, they stand here and they write these novels or like these essays, and they just don't care what other people think, and they don't care what they have to say, or like what they're doing in their life. He's drawing his line like by his lake, right? And that in that sense, that's the most powerful thing that you can do.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, I guess you could see that, if the world is a wave, right? It's just this motion that you can be like back to taking shame from someone else's, taking our opinion from someone else's. It's like, well, you might see that you're right, but then, the shit happens anyway, or the wave crashes on you anyway. it's otherwise, again, if you're trying to draw a line, depends on where you're at and who you ask. Everyone's going to say they have different hopes for you. Well, why don't you abide thus? Thou shalt not. Come over here, go over there, do this, do that, say this, say that. Don't do this, don't do that. Right? It takes many forms.
Yes, it does. So I'd actually like to read the 2 notes that you have following.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, sure.
Or would you like to read them?
Let's see. Okay, yeah, I guess because it addresses the rest of the points, because we've been going on about the envy and the ignorance. So, okay, actually, let's actually look at these last few lines or other lines first. That a man must take himself for better, for worse, as his portion, that though the wide universe is full of good, no kernel of nourishing corn can come to him but through this toil bestowed on that plot of ground which is given to him to till. Right? Like, don't go mucking about in other people's gardens. Like, you got your own, right? So envy is a resentment, right? And it's a longing towards others' possessions. And, mainly, I guess, it's material and it's immaterial. It's like you might be jealous of their characteristics, of their wealth, of their wisdom, maybe their family, maybe their loved ones. It could be a lot of things. And it's like jealousy is more like apprehension or bristling. Like, I think it's usually thought in terms of someone else is going to take something away from me. Right? Like, if you're a jealous boyfriend or girlfriend, then you're jealous someone might take your SO. Let's see. So
they might take it away from you, whereas envy is more so they have something that I feel like I deserve.
Yeah, you might get kind of Smeagol there, right? Like, that's where you might get kind of Golem from Lord of the Rings. Like, that's its utmost expression. It's kind of like that, or
my precious.
And maybe it's even Darth Vader territory. Right, Anakin. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, it definitely is. Oh, especially if you hate the ideal or you're jealous of the ideal, because then you're going against rank and order, and then you see how people want to say there is no rank and order. And it's like, well, if that's the case, we haven't evolved there yet. Like, that would take some real leaps in like consciousness and physiology, I think. But in the meantime, there is a rank and there is an order. There has to be, ask the soldier, or the warrior, right? It's the closest thing to the philosopher, because the dictum is discern or perish, and you don't have time, and if your judgment's wrong, it's like that's the difference between life and death. Back to the importance and the gravity of this, because if we're talking self-reliance, and it's a matter of not just hopefully you'd be doing something more than surviving here. Maybe you'd even be having some fun. I don't know. I don't know what people are looking to get out of life. You'll get as many different answers as you ask. Everyone's got their own little ideas, right? I like what Hunter S. Thompson said in Fear and Loathing, right? Like, we're all wired into our own survival trip. Modern condition looks like it's heading that way more and more too. So, talked about envy, talked about jealousy. So, okay, yeah, in the synthesis, right? So then if envy is ignorance, it means the only reason you'd envy another man is because you don't know any better. Right? You don't understand rank and order. You don't understand the ideal. You don't understand the payoff. You don't understand what's at stake. You don't understand a lot of these things, let's say.
Then imitation is suicide.
Yeah, because obviously if you're copying or borrowing or leaning too heavily on someone else, even if it's master, right? If you're hiding behind their skirts, what's what's of the self or self-reliant in that? But again, the importance of having a master, the importance of having some sort of order, because, we have this feedback in our physiology that tells us where we stand in the world. And I think modern people are definitely kind of out of sorts with that, right? It's not the same as when for the last hundreds of millions of years of animal evolution, where we're present in each other's lives in much more immediate ways, let's say, for much smaller payouts. Because let's say if you're in a small hunting tribe, like the amount of energy you put into that interaction with a small group of people compared to the amount of minimal interaction you can put into an even larger amount of people now to get something absurd. Like, if you go and buy let's say, I don't know, a television or a computer monitor, it's like, okay, where were these parts from? Where were the resources from? Like, you got screws from America, electronics from China,
Yeah.
right? Plastic from Germany. I don't know. I'm just making shit up, right? We're
Yeah.
just running with it. So you see that to live, like, you're not going to go live by a pond and like manufacture like a Gilligan's Island kind of pine cone style TV, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not, and to think kind of pedantically like in that direction is not the point. It's never like the whole point of this was never to not be a part of or to isolate oneself or lord oneself even over others.
Yeah.
That's also besides the point, because then if that's how your behavior and your mindset is, it's like, well, then if someone wants to be your student, then it seems like your philosophy is just to beat the student. And yes, you can learn a lot from a master's discipline, but if it's just beatings, chances are something's going to be lacking. And I think you can see that a lot with cult abuse and even just social media, probably.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't even need to join a cult to get abuse or receive abuse. You just the modern condition, you put yourself out there in any way, like, right, if it would, like Emerson or otherwise, you draw lines. This has always been the case.
Yeah.
And as an autoimmune response from a crowd, it seems only natural, right? Because maybe this guy is really speaking witchcraft, right?
Yeah.
Maybe he's saying something real dangerous. I'd say that would
satanic.
Well, I would say that probably betrays the fact that like thought has always been dangerous, right? Like, wonder what happens if you eat these mushrooms. You want to find out like how many how many found out like what were the wrong mushrooms to eat?
Yeah.
Right. Like, well, these ones got lucky; they found the right ones. These other ones, not so much.
Yeah, I always think about that, like, in the Amazon when they're making that, like the ayahuasca tea, like it's from two different vines. One that like allows you to digest it, and one that allows you to basically like go to another dimension for 10 minutes. Like the fact that they found that out of thousands upon thousands of plant species in the Amazon jungle is kind of a testament to like how many people died just to do that.
Well, what's interesting is the compulsion to do that and then seek that, because maybe they found maybe they could have found like more indifferent food, but they're like, oh, we're going to keep making this one for sure, right? Like, every time, I guess, every step in evolution is an opportunity choice or opportunity cost, whether we see it or not, right? Same thing applies in philosophy, politics, right? Like, if we're focusing on what to in terms of heuristic, by the way, I meant it's in the notes here somewhere, but I mentioned the Buddha's poisoned arrow parable, which is always relevant, I think, to modern people more than ever, because if the question is that, that's like, you have a question, you come to me and you have a question, and I say, well, here's the thing, you have this question for me, but you have this poisoned arrow in you, and we got to get it out of you because you're going to die, and if before we try and remove it, now I get it, like right away. Well, actually, we'll get to that in a second. Let me finish the story first. And I say, we got to get it out, so you can, so you can live. And then you say, wait, but before you remove this poison arrow, what was the banner of the Klansman who shot me? And I say, but brother, we got to get this poison arrow out of you. You're going to die. If you keep asking these questions, you're going to die before we can remove this arrow, right? And it just goes on thus. So, you can see it, with the right training and the discerning eye, whether you develop your own methods or learn from others, you can see these things, you can come to see these things really quickly in philosophy. What is an utter just dead end, let's say, or what takes you further away. And it's like, well, what's the goal? If it's anything like self-reliance or being an island, if you can conceive of what that is, if you can assume that being your own island feels good, let's say, if you can assume ataraxia feels good, conceptions like that, right? Or enlightenment. You can assume that it's a superior physiology and that there is a goal here and there was treasure to be found, as, many people have attested through the ages. And, it's like, why do we even idealize these things in the first place? Because Emerson's going to ask these same questions. If we just keep tilling these same grounds, inevitably we're going to discuss we're going to speak the whole essay of self-reliance before we even read it. So I guess that's a good point to, let me finish this note here and we'll move on. Okay, imitation is suicide, right? What's self-reliant in that? toll your own. Okay, this is also monstrous, right? This is literally the heaviest burden territory. And if I could sum up the heaviest burden, you know, metaphysics aside, literal questions and thought experiment aside, it would simply be, can you love your fate? That's what he's asking you. Because if you remember, it's like, is it a demon in your ear or is it a God? And then you can answer that demon or that God.
Yeah.
Right. Like, you know, is it something I'm cursing? You know, we've already been speaking to this since pretty much, you know, for the last, I don't know how long we've been going here, but, you know, at least for a little bit. So yes, it's monstrous, but this is Emerson's affirmative answer to life. This is his acceptance. It's his amor fati, right? Like the heaviest burden, it's question. And, you know, I think this, and this is what the note says, it's not just taking one's fate into one's hand, but it's where fate departs for destiny. Because if fate is this plot of ground that you inherited, whether you asked for it or not, whether you gave it a name or not, is it, you know, what else in this world can be said to be you? In all seriousness, you know, again, if you look to this world and you see yourself reflected in it, it's like, why are you looking to other people? Like, what are you expecting? Who are you expecting? Are you looking for someone to show you how to live? Are you looking for someone to fix your head? You know what I mean? Like, but it's not apparent. You know, I mentioned earlier that blind spot in consciousness. If it's if envy if resentment seems so apparent from the outside, how come it's not more apparent on the inside?
Mm-hmm. Have you ever read or at least like heard of Rich Man, Poor Man, or like Rich Dad, Poor Dad?
I don't think I have.
It's kind of, it's a book about like economics, and he goes on and he says, well, my rich dad, he would say, well, my poor dad, he would be asked, oh, Dad, can we get a trampoline? And then he said, well, we can't afford that. Sorry. And rich dad, you know, when asked, oh, can we get a trampoline? He would say, well, how can I afford that? Right. That's kind of what you're saying here with you inherit a plot of land, right? And some people, they'll see it, oh, I have a bunch of dirt here. It sucks. I have this pile of dirt. And then other people.
That way, real quick, because I know you listen to Sturgill Simpson. What's that line in that song? You can call me King Pill of, you know, shit mountain. I don't know. Just made me think of that. He's like, if you want it, you can have it. You can have it all.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Also a Nine Inch Nails song.
Yeah. So with your plot of land, well, it doesn't have to just be dirt. You can do whatever you want with it. Right.
Yeah. It's like, oh, wait, all this time has passed and like you haven't planted anything.
Yeah.
Like, and then you look to this world and I guess, you know, we want to blame them. And it's like you question, you know, it can easily be, it's easily because of bad teachers, culture gone awry, decadence, decay, rot, like a lot of what we see going on in America right now.
Yeah, it's like no one gave me a shovel. Well, guess what, buddy? You're supposed to build your own shovel.
Yeah, but again, it's not apparent. Again, the ignorance is that you can't even see it, right? Like, oh, like some, you know, chances are people have been trying to throw shovels into your hands for a long time, and maybe you've been refusing them, and maybe you took one and you did something with it. Maybe you didn't. Like, maybe there's a better analogy, right? Like you looked at this world as maybe you didn't recognize it as a platform for action, but you looked at it and you took from it what you wanted, and was it what you thought it was, and was it what you actually wanted? You know, and if the answer is no, then I would say that's a serious problem. Like you wouldn't want to be there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'll move on to the next paragraph.
Wait, let me double check something real quick. We're still on that. Yeah. Okay, yeah. And fate departs for destiny. Yeah, keep going.
A man is relieved and gay when he has put his heart into his work and done his best. But what he has said or done otherwise shall give him no peace. It is a deliverance which does not deliver. In the attempt, his genius deserts him. No muse befriends, no invention, no hope.
All right, so before we even go anywhere, like this isn't in the notes, right? But right away, I'm thinking from Nietzsche's collection of essays, Thoughts Out of Season, or, you know, Untimely Meditations, Schopenhauer's editor. And this is one because I'd read Emerson well before I ever read Nietzsche, right? Like they taught us about the Transcendentalists and some of that stuff, right, in school back when. And I'd read all this stuff a long time ago, and it always resonated. And, but I remember reading, hearing it echoed in Nietzsche when he talks about, the traveler and like, what's the closest thing, what's the most common thing you observe in man wherever you go? And the traveler says, well, it's laziness wherever I go. It's that's what I see in man, how he hides behind others' opinions, right? Like now, like, that's basically Nietzsche echoing the inversion of what Ralph Waldo Emerson literally just expressed above, right? It's what we just read. Nietzsche's saying, like, rather than, so if in Emerson, we're hearing our own opinion in someone else, with Nietzsche, we are hiding behind someone else's opinion because, are these our opinions? It's like, no, it's public opinion, right? Yeah. This is the safe bet. This is the coward's bet. This is the easy bet. This is the no one will bug you bet.
Yeah.
This is the, oh, you don't have a spine bet, right? This is the, like, it gets real embarrassing depending on how far it goes, right? Like, I'll stop there. We don't need the excess irony.
Well, it's not just a deliverance which does not deliver. It's a deliverance which you did not deliver.
Yeah, and I guess you could say then how could it be said to be deliverance at all? Because someone else gave it to you? Like that's your treasure on this earth? Or that's your, what I mean? That's you, that's your house treasure. Okay, here's a serious question. This gets into heaviest burden territory. And maybe it's just also another way of rephrasing it. Like, what if we start stripping away everything? Like, what if I take away everything you have and everything you think you have, like material possessions and maybe even familial obligations and family and things like that. And let's say we start stripping away everything from your life. What are you left with? Like, is there anything at all? Would you be okay with that? Like, oh, what if even your health failed you? What then, right? Like, it's easy to be, because again, it's easy, there's two things there. I think of two things here, right? I don't remember who said it, but it's like, any man can, off the top of my head, anyone can handle a tragedy, but it takes some real character to handle the day to day. And conversely, it's easy to be, smooth and easygoing when things are going your way or what you hope is your way. And then it's another thing when shit blows up in your face or goes in another direction, right? What then? Because if you're not okay, then it's like, well, what do you even have then, right? I'd argue nothing, right? If it's only as you dictate, then that's a betrayal of fate. You know what I mean? That's because fate tells you otherwise. It doesn't matter whether you're born the son of a king, these are in all the hero myths, right? They all go with prophecies and stories, right? Like somewhere it is writ, right?
Somewhere it is written. Did you cut out?
No. I just paused.
Okay.
I let it be a pause. Yeah, no, I know I tend to just run ahead. Let it breathe a little bit more because we're kind of. Because again, it's already dense stuff. This is, okay, I guess this is very telling. I should have started off with this. It's telling, I don't know, if someone asked me, there's probably a scholar who knows somewhere, but I know that Nietzsche or Emerson was a big study for Nietzsche, right? And his copy of his essays and his books, right? Like they were filled with notes and underlines and all that stuff. So it tells you that Emerson was a long time study for Nietzsche. And if anything's a long time study for Nietzsche, it tells you that it's an infinitely deep reflecting pool because Nietzsche's one himself, right? You could spend the rest of your life studying Nietzsche and still probably be unpacking what he's saying or looking at it in a different way. But again, once more, inevitably, the students have to leave, the master's domain or the master's abode. And this is the line Emerson's drawing, right? He's beyond the worlds of gods and masters, and he gets into that.
Well, it kind of reminds me of Plato's allegory of the cave.
Oh, actually funny, because I know there's a point in this essay where I might have written the note or I might not have. I might have at least just thought it, but I basically said we're right back in the cave again. You know what I mean? Like these kind of long circles that the centuries draw. Nietzsche, his conception of it was that they return to themselves, that like you have this long period of like either growth, expansion, then decay and rot, and then someone would come out of this mess as almost like a last gasp of whatever this thing is. And
sometimes try to bring some people out with them.
that's well, I mean, that's the tradition of rank and order.
Yeah.
If you think of Athens in the Hellenic age, right? Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, Alexander the Great, right? And this is all while everything's on the decline, right?
Yeah.
This is we're already on our way out here.
Mhm.
This is Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy.
Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy.
It's an important book, and it's crazy to see how, in what ways, like, okay, I could tell you this in a very concrete way. Zaff's Last Messiah is a certain take on that,
Mhm.
kind of like updated with some modern conception, and made very, I don't know, it's very concise too. That's like kind of, I see that as bedrock work too, right? Like
Yeah.
there's these ideas and these notions, and you can only go so far before you can only reframe them or re-examine them, or what I mean? Like, and I suppose you could say, well, you can always go further, but this gets into both back to the poison arrow territory of, is this useful, right? Is this a how? Is this going to actually, if you're looking to get somewhere, does this take you there, or does this take you, right? Is this further away from whatever your prize is? Because I don't know what it is.
Well, this is back in the labyrinth, right? I mean, because
Right,
you
because
can
can
follow
people
one
even say, what are
path and
the,
it's
well,
good, and you'll want to keep going, but at some point you gotta like try another way.
right, well, what are people looking for? What are they actually doing?
Yeah.
Right, like, are they back, if you go remember back to our first discussion, right? If a will to power is this myriad of forces, that's in man, is the same as sonar in a bat or a moth growing eye spots,
Mhm.
right? To contend with the forces here, that philosophical labyrinth was always the same.
Yeah.
The hostile brothers and the Apollonian and the Dionysian. uh Maybe it's not hostile brothers, maybe it's just depressive brothers. I don't like that's, is that more of a Zappian take? And definitely in the modern day with pessimist philosophy like Thomas Ligotti, let's say.
I tried to get a hold of Thomas Ligotti actually.
How'd that go?
It didn't go.
Like, come on, we're talking
But
about like no, like, you know it's
but
be
well,
fun.
so what happened was like he's got a website, right? And I just looked up like how do I contact him, and then there was like this forum on his website. Then there was this dude who was like, "Oh, I've got his contact information. I can reach out to him." So then I like found that email. I hit that guy up. Then he said, "Yeah, I'll reach out to him." And then if he chooses to reach out to you, then yeah, so be it. That's how it goes. But if not, then I'm sorry, man. So yeah, like I'm assuming he sent an email to him and then he chose not to respond to me, or maybe this guy doesn't know him uh as well as I think he does, and he just never really responded to me. But it would have been nice to have him on just to talk about the conspiracy.
Well, I mean, then we can at least talk about it, right? At least for this
Yeah.
moment. Let's see, wait, where are we at here? Do we, no, we didn't cover that part. What he has said or done otherwise shall give, oh yeah, okay. A man is relieved and gay when he's put his heart into his work and done his best. But what he has said or done otherwise shall give him no peace. It is a deliverance which he does not deliver. Yeah, we covered that. In the attempt, his genius deserts him. Oh, okay. Back to Schopenhauer, because I almost forgot. Schopenhauer's
Yeah.
educator. He says it, and it echoes a Buddhistic sentiment. It echoes ancient pre-Socratic Greek element, right?
Yeah.
Nietzsche says, a man becomes a decked out, ghost. Like he's a husk of a man. He's like a poorly painted puppet. He's all these things, right? Because he's hiding behind conventions and others' opinions, right? This gets into genealogy and morality, right? Like how we hide ourselves behind convention.
Yeah.
And and then you see that again, the reflection, right, in Emerson's words. In the attempt, his genius deserts him. Nietzsche says he abandoned his own genius. I've termed it to you, as I said before, declaring bankruptcy on your own experience. To the degrees that this world tells you, you say, this is what I think, this is what I feel, and this world says, no, you shouldn't think that, you shouldn't feel that. And maybe they have a good reason to tell you that, or maybe they don't, right? Maybe they're blind as bats. Maybe they're blinder than that moth with the eye spots, right? It's hard to tell. Well, it's hard to tell, I guess, if you have yet to discern such things yourself. Maybe.
Yeah. So I'm thinking let's take a bathroom break, and then
that's a good call.
I'm going to read the next 3 paragraphs all at once, and then we'll dissect them.
Wait, hold on. There's one. Okay, yeah, that's probably good enough.
All right. Just when you see me back on the camera, you just say something.
All right, will do. Thanks, man.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Well, I'm back. We're having this is a good little dissection of self-reliance. I'm glad that I was able to do this. That Mynaa was able to do this. It's kind of something new on the podcast, kind of just going line by line on something important. And I think Self-Reliance by Emerson is one of, if not the most important piece of literature, of American literature, throughout the history of America. It's something truly fascinating, something to really take to heart. And when you're in high school and you're reading this, you just kind of, you don't really think much of it. It's kind of like what we were saying earlier of the people in the Civil War, or like whatever, like, all the soldiers, all the workers, all the slaves, hearing this and thinking, well, what can this do for me, right? That's kind of what you're thinking of when you're in high school and you're hearing this. You're kind of just you're there and you're just thinking, oh, like, what does this have to do with me? And
this guy here.
Oh, hey, Mynaa. Yeah, I was kind of just saying how self-reliance is like the most important work of literature in American history. At least
Possibly,
in my opinion.
In terms of because he did we read the part, did he reference Moses and
Yes.
But because I completely ignored that, meant to get into that. He gives examples from different traditions, right? You got Moses, so is it recording, by the way? I don't know if it's on or off. Okay, right. So you have Moses, that's what do you call it? That's law, and that's also religion. And then you have Plato, and that's philosophy, and that's government, that's other things. And then you have Milton, and that's literature. And familiar, the voice of the mind is to each the highest merit we ascribe to Moses, Plato, and Milton is that they set at not books and traditions, and spoke not what men but what they thought. Right? They were the creators, they were the shapers, they were the makers. Right? They weren't the timorous deer. Right? They weren't the lizards and insects hiding under the rocks. Right? They weren't the decked out painted puppets, with their lying pernicious spirits, trying to tell you what you should think and what you should feel. Let's say. That was a line from Schopenhauer's Educator. I was trying to remember, by the way. They're pernicious lying spirits. I always like that one. All right. So, it's got some oomph. So he used the word pernicious. It's serious.
So I'm actually going to just read this first paragraph just because it just has so much, and then I'll read the following too. Trust thyself. Every heart vibrates that iron string. Accept the place the divine providence has found for you, the society of your contemporaries, the connection of events. Great men have always done so, and confided themselves childlike to the genius of their age, betraying their perception that the absolutely trustworthy was seated at their heart, working through their hands, predominating in all their being. And we are now men, and must accept in the highest mind the same transcendent destiny, and not minors and invalids in a protected corner, not cowards fleeing before a revolution, but guides, redeemers, and benefactors, obeying the almighty effort and advancing on chaos and the dark.
Right. So interesting thing to note, like chaos and dark is capitalized. Capital C, capital D. Divine providence at the beginning, not capitalized. Almighty is capitalized, effort. Almighty, capital A, lowercase e, effort.
Mhm.
right? So you see what he's putting emphasis on and
Yeah.
value on. Back to the great men, right? Like they weren't waiting for someone else to give them permission, and he gets in this, the next statements, this, or the next few paragraphs is where he does discuss childhood. And it's, probably like this is that, definitely some of the most beautiful things to ever appear in American literature or American
Yeah.
philosophy. So what did I, and what notes did I write here? Let's take a look, see if it's worth mentioning.
Once more, mere fate departing for
For
destiny.
destiny, right? Yeah, that's in there too, right?
Yeah.
It's a difference where, okay, fate has determined thus for me, right? You carve a more fati on your shield, but who's fighting the battle,
Yeah.
right?
Well, you're
Where's it
fighting
taking
the battle.
place? Yeah. Again, I guess it's what, and again, you can question against what? It's the same thing it's always been: lying, pernicious spirits.
Mhm.
Right? Like you look
Yeah.
at the boy. Let's see, betraying. Confided themselves childlike to the genius of their age, meaning they stepped forward. They weren't trying to return backwards. They weren't lamenting the past. They weren't saying like, oh, we need to go back, and they weren't fretting the future. It's like they were the ones who strove boldly into it, right? They ushered it forward,
Mhm.
So I'm just looking along here, seeing what else is worth really digging into here.
Well,
Right.
we are now men and must accept in the highest mind the same transcendent destiny.
Yep. And he says it himself, right? And we're men. We're not minors and invalids in a protected corner. We're not cowards fleeing before a revolution. And this is, if you wanted to be critical, this is where you'd start saying, guide, but the nature of this essay is the critical, right? Like, so it's kind of, to criticize this, it's like, well, you're already behind, right? So that's an amusing thing about criticism on work like this, right? Because it's on a different level. Right? It's like Nietzsche's, the profundity, and it's not the same as, your average philosopher, your average religious thinker. Guides, redeemers, benefactors, right? Because then you always go, okay, yeah, right, like be free, be yourself. Why? Because you told me to, right? Like depends how paranoid and hostile you want to be towards these lines of thought, because what's the point? What's there anyone after?
That's a good point you bring up, though. With all these philosophers that tout like self-reliance, that tout like being yourself, that tout
right, but pay me first.
Yeah, right. Like, so what? You're telling me,
or maybe it's
myself?
Recognize me first.
Yeah.
Recognize me, pay me. There's usually rules and stipulations, and that's the point. Like you're right, tangle back up in the same old morality again.
Yeah.
Most cases, that's where you're at. And there's none of that in here. And I guess, see, advancing on chaos and dark. So what do you think? See that now, do you see eternal recurrence in that, right? Like why else would you capitalize chaos and dark? Because you're referring to them as almost like deities, right? Like primordial forces. Like he's saying they've always been here.
Yeah. Well, you get to the end of the line, and where are you?
That's a good question.
You're right back where you started.
Yeah, the first is usually in the last. It's a question of how the child births itself from its own parents. When the parents are there all along to hold them back.
Yes.
To protect them, to dote over them, to see that they follow a similarly prescribed path.
Yes.
And then there's always a question of to what degrees is that ever really like helping growth or retarding growth, right?
Yes. You've gotten the dirt, and what are you going to do with it now?
Yeah, pretty much, right? Like, and this is where it really is, and it's in an individual's hand, because who else is going to do it? Like here's a question, like for you to be happy, and he even asks a question like this, but you can come to a similar conclusion yourself. He asks, or it's a question of, can you be happy unless everyone is happy? Does everyone have to be happy for you to be happy?
Yeah.
They do have to be happy for you to be happy?
Oh, no, I was just I was just like following with like what you
Well,
said.
yeah, I mean, it's just, yeah, it's like yeah. And then if you did think that way, well, if you think that way, you may be a romantic or an idiot or
Yeah.
a bit of both.
Mm. But everyone's not going to be happy. So if you have to be happy, only if everyone else is happy, then you'll always be unhappy.
Yeah, it's at that point you're cutting off your,
Well, like you said, you're declaring bankruptcy on yourself.
yeah, at that point you are.
Okay. So God has armed youth and puberty and manhood no less with its own piquancy and charm, and made it enviable and gracious, and its claims not to be put by. If it will stand by itself, then here Mynaa underlines a large portion of this paragraph and the next. Do not think the youth has no force, because he cannot speak to you and me. Hark! In the next room, his voice is sufficiently clear and emphatic. It seems he knows how to speak to his contemporaries, bashful or bold. Then he will know how to make us seniors very unnecessary. The nonchalance of boys who are sure of a dinner and would disdain as much as a lord to do or say aught to conciliate one is the healthy attitude of human nature. A boy is in the parlor what the pit is in the playhouse, independent, irresponsible, looking out from his corner on such people and facts as pass by. He tries and sentences them on their merits in the swift, summary way of boys, as good, bad, interesting, silly, eloquent, troublesome. He cumbers himself never about consequences, about interests. He gives an independent, genuine verdict. You must court him. He does not court you, but the man is, as it were, clapped into jail by his conscience. And then the underline ends. As soon as
Wait, that last word was consciousness.
Oh, consciousness.
Different.
What did I say?
Yeah.
Conscious?
Yeah, conscience. And, both relative, but go on.
As soon as he has once acted or spoken with éclat, French brilliant effect, social distinction, conspicuous success, he is a committed person, watched by the sympathy or the hatred of hundreds, whose affections must now enter into his account. There is no Lethe, Greek personification of oblivion, for this. Ah, that he could pass again into his neutrality. Who can thus avoid all pledges, and having observed, observe again from the same unaffected, unbiased, unbribable, unaffrighted innocence, must always be formidable. He would utter opinions on all passing affairs, which, being seen to be not private but necessary, would sink like darts into the ear of men and put them in fear.
Yeah, so that's all very dense too, right?
Yeah,
It's
I kind of have to
this
say
chocolate
that,
cake. It's almost too much.
yeah, that bashful or bold, then he will know how to make us seniors very unnecessary. That's kind of the killing of your creators, right? That's like slaying the gods, the people who created you.
That's gutting the gods. Yeah, that's actually absolutely. It's like, we come from this old dead world. It's like the cold vacuum of space, and and the world that we would instead seek to create, it's something that's like, well, you can breathe here, right? Where you're not suffering under the same stupidity of the stupid ages, which has been a long time standing. The dark ages, the stupid ages, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
Right? Believing in all sorts of untruths.
Well, we're always going to be believing in untruths.
Yeah, it's right. It's just updating the models, right? It's like, okay, we need to update our maps, and hopefully more than every few hundred or 1,000 years, right?
The zeitgeist, right? You know what the zeitgeist is?
Yeah, the spirit.
No, it's the zeitgeist. It's so
Geist is German for spirit.
Let's say that all scientific thought, it's a building, right? And the zeitgeist is the scaffolding on the building, right? We're always remodeling or like renovating or like building like to this building, right? And we're building it up, and sometimes we have to destroy like entire stories before we can actually get it right. And then we just keep building and building and building, and that's the zeitgeist. It's kind of this constant moving.
No, right, of course. It's you in this case where it seems like you're referring to it as like the just the force of history and man and events itself, right? Like,
yeah, like the earth was the center of the universe, but then, oh
yes,
no, it's not. The sun is the
yep,
center of the universe. Oh
we've
wait,
been
no,
tumbling ever
it's
since.
not. It's we're not even in the center of anything,
Nope.
right? Well,
It's
okay. One caveat to that is that you, Mynaa Miesnowan, is actually the center of the observable universe in your perspective, because you can only see so far in every direction, right?
right.
So in a
I
sense,
mean,
we're all the center of the observable universe, but we're not the center of the universe. And that kind of speaks to
well, I
subjectivity
mean,
versus objectivity.
well, again, we think this. I mean, he kind of gets into this in here, and I think it's,
Yeah.
you know, there is a very Asiatic line of thought in Christianity, you know, and it's when Jesus says, "Why do you take thought for raiment?" Right?
Yeah.
And that's a serious question, because he's literally saying, like, you know, your thoughts here, what you think about things, what you think about yourself, like, that's not enough to protect you in this world. It's not going to stop the elements. It's not going to stop you from suffering. It's not going to stop any of that. It might bring comfort. It might bring something else, but, you know, I guess it's a conception of where are they taking you, right? If it's a labyrinth, it's a matter of navigating it.
Yeah.
You know, one's own specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Again, we're not like, because there's a point, you know, and I think plenty of people would know it if they're there. It's like, there's a point where it's like, dude, you're already beyond everyone else's help. Like, you're in uncharted waters. You're in uncharted territory. Because how would anyone else know?
Yeah.
You know, where you've been, what you've seen, what that's been to you.
Yeah.
How it's felt, how it's how you've dealt, what you've had to do to survive, let's say. You know, because self-reliance takes many forms, I guess you could say, right?
Yeah. It does.
But
you
go
need
ahead.
to be able to navigate through the labyrinth on your own, but someone needs to teach you how to walk through it in the beginning. Always.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's you know, that's always been the role of say family and culture, and, you know, and it's always a question of, by the time, you know, you're learning whatever it is that there's someone's trying to teach you, you know, there's a question of, well, is this even relevant anymore?
Yeah.
Because you could probably think about things that they taught you in school that might already be not relevant, right, due to technology changes.
Yeah.
Like, I guess an obvious and easy one would be like, okay, if you went from using floppy disk to zip disk to compact disks to, like, okay, everything's on a cloud now. You don't even need physical objects.
Yeah.
Yeah, is one just obvious example.
Although it is good to keep physical objects if you truly want to keep them and ensure that they won't be destroyed. Like, for instance,
but again, what if a fire? What if a flood? What if you know, could you survive regard? Actually, I was thinking about this earlier for some reason. There's this parable out of the Zen masters of this master. His student found enlightenment, and he was passing on the torch, because it's inevitable that, you know, within Zen, the students can trace their lineage all the way back to the Buddha, and it's inevitable that they pass on the torch, and they look for the signs and the markers that, my students found enlightenment, and they have their own systems and their own methods. And it's very different than most everything we do in the West, even our monastic traditions. But there's this one parable where the master is saying to the student, like, and this gets into rank and order, and this is like, there's almost like nothing you can take or add to this. It's almost everything in one. And that's that the master goes, okay, I have this really ancient book, and it came from my masters, and I wrote in it too, and now it's your book, right? And you're talking to Buddhists who don't believe in any possessions or attachments at all, right? And it's not even that they don't believe, it's just that they don't act. Their physiology is not geared towards that. They spend a lifetime, I'm not going to just say detaching, because that's not quite right. It's just very different. So within that tradition, trying to remember which exact story it is. So he says, I'm going to give you this book. And so basically right away, the student says, okay, great, thanks for the book. And then he immediately throws it into the fire.
Yeah.
And the master, get this, the master cries out in alarm, you know, oh my God, what are you doing? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? And I don't remember the exact lines, but, and the student goes, you know, what do you mean? Like, what are you saying? and the master realizes like, oh, his student just surpassed him.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of like in with
Yeah.
the old, out with the new, but he's still maintaining the tradition because it's a very earnest one in the sense it's master to pupil.
Yeah.
There's no in between. There's no abstract. It's you're either breaking your rational mind on these riddles and you're bringing your attention to your suffering. Because I mean, think about it. You know, do you want to live in a monastery? Do you realize how painful that is?
Yeah.
Do you realize how much your instincts and your yearnings and your like all these things, if you really have to conceive of it, or even like a monastery is easy compared to going to suffer in a jungle and imagine just living with biting, stinging insects and cobras and tigers and spiders and all that.
Well,
right? Like,
it kind of reminds me of like,
imagine sitting in that and just staying aware of the fact that that's where you're at. You're not consoling yourself with the thought of an afterlife. You're not elaborating philosophy so as to chase your ego across ever more ironic, sublimations of these fantasy realms, right? Whether you're making a true world a fantasy or a fantasy a true world, right? Is what we do in philosophy. Pay me, right?
Yeah. But yes, but what this is like reminding me of is like you're with your master and he has this torch in the labyrinth, and then he passes the torch onto you like as he's about to collapse, and then you just dump water on it and you say, no, I'm going to walk through the dark instead.
Right. But Zen isn't in a book. So there you go. Buddhism isn't in a book, right? There's certain things that aren't in a book. In essence, what Emerson's writing about isn't in a book. And, he, to a certain degree, he's got a certain bit of, satire and irony and criticism in there, just like Nietzsche does. And a lot of what he says says and criticizes is inevitably of himself, because to even be able to make such criticisms, it tells you, oh, they've already been there, done that.
Yeah.
Right. They already see it. They're updating our maps. We're the ones who didn't see it.
Yes.
So let me ask you, okay, thinking about this, regardless of what anyone else's theories and sayings are, when it comes to evolution, and I think, by the way, because I know we're getting close to about our time here.
Yeah.
And this is so dense, and I don't even know that we'll get done kind of referencing subject matter around it, because I would like to address the notion of camel, lion, child specifically that's in here, and that might be a good place to start next time.
What's your question?
It's about evolution. So was the first sense touch? Because if it's not nucleic acids, what are they? What are they called that they estimated were the first organic molecules? Or not molecules, just would just be single-celled organisms or what have you? No, wouldn't even be that. It'd be building blocks.
Just single-celled organisms.
It was a certain sort of protein though. I can't remember what it is.
Well, that's not an organism though. That's just RNA is what you're thinking of.
Right, but it's but if it's organic, like, I guess, right, it's the building blocks of life, but we don't consider it life, huh?
No.
But being that it's what first evolved in the soup and it just existed there inside of it, touching it and nothing else, because it didn't have the evolved structures, these senses to take in the information, then was the sense of touch the first one? Technically speaking, like, it's kind of as arbitrary as, is it a big bang, or
it's not really a sense at all. It's more of the chemical reaction itself was the first sense. Just
right. Well, that makes me think of right away. You see a nose starts forming around that to take that in, right? To understand those chemicals.
And you touch it, right? You like you are touching it in a sense. You're dissolving into some soup, some biological soup that is turning you into this single-celled organism, right?
Wait. Why would it be turning you into it?
Well, not turning you.
Oh, you mean okay, gotcha. Okay. No, you're talking about the little RNA. Let's say the little pieces of organic proteins. Where it went from what we would consider inert matter to, but I mean, I guess you would say a more inert matter to a more living matter.
Yes. Well,
was
it's just a series of a long chain of chemical reactions which brought on something that can stay self-contained within itself and continue reacting longer
right.
than everything else, right?
It's
Something
like
that was
an individual reactor with amongst all these reactions then,
yes,
right? Because it's so it's less like an agent and more like a reactor, right? It's like a little engine.
yeah, exactly.
I'm not the biggest fan of boiling things down to a hyper rationalist mindset, or what do you call it, mechanical, because it implies that the notion of mechanics implies that it was created to these ends. And I guess you look to evolution, I don't know, either way, it's real quick with these formulations that either way whether you're even aware of where the thought processes comes from, you're either hundreds or thousands of years behind in human thought processes and then even analyzing them, right? Because before you know it, like, you're dwelling in objectivism, or you're dwelling in empiricism, or you're dwelling, right? Like, I'm just wondering, like, the senses, and then so like the senses out of these building blocks and these materials that were evolving over time, it's like they're coalesced these senses, and we only have a few of them named, right? We have basically 5, 6, maybe 7. It depends how liberal you want to be with your definitions. But so essentially, it's touch because the thing comes into being, and then because there's not just touch here, there's other information to take in.
Taste, obviously.
Yes, so that's the nose, that's taste, and that's smell.
Yeah.
And so my thoughts are, it's like smell and sight came first, because other animals you see, they don't need eyeballs at all. Like a rat has very small pupils.
Yeah.
It's basically blind, but my God, it can navigate the world like few other actual mammals can.
Yes.
Coyote is another one, right? Very successful animal. If they knew how to build a boat, it'd be in Hawaii by now. But in the meantime, it's part of all the contiguous states, and I think Alaska too. So,
yes.
So working off this model, it's something like touch is first, or maybe it's more like, okay, this touch is the actual vessel that it's contained, because you have a body, and it was only ever in our heads that humans thought we were separate, let's say, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, it means that we've existed in contact, touching this world the entire time, right? Like, you feel the air, the wind on a windy day, you feel the water, that if you come into contact with certain things, it kills you, certain things you don't. Back to the mushroom theory, right? Like, if you don't know these mushrooms are dangerous, right? Like, that's the end of you touch the wrong thing. And it's one of the most important senses. And to my mind, I can't help but think that touch, out of all the modern senses, because it's easy to go like, oh, look at people stuck in their abstract hells, right? Look at people stuck in their mental traps and their regrets and their other odds and ends, they're hiding behind public opinion, right? They're being anyone and anything but themselves, let's say.
Yeah. But with touch, you feel pain, you feel pleasure.
Yes, right. Well, it makes sense that and it makes sense that if touch is so immediate, it makes sense that you'd avoid it, right? Going like, the reason why I'm going to be a timorous deer, right? The reason why I'm going to hide is because I don't want to deal with the fear or the pain, the unknown, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Right? It's shrinking, it's the difference between addressing the fact and shrinking from the fact. Like, if you don't acknowledge your weakness, if you don't shore up your defenses, then your kung fu is weak, right? Like, you're going to be taken down. That's mental and physical.
Yes.
Right. And that's talk about a place to start or a place to stand. It's like, well, there's a mutable law of the universe, right? It's not a matter of freedom. It's a matter of strong and weak wills. I guess we'll forever be returning to this point. Because Emerson, this essay was written a few years before Nietzsche was even born, and it's got eternal recurrence, it's got the will to power, it's got a lot of conceptions in there, and it's also got references to all the usual suspects, right? Diogenes and Socrates and all the old guys. And again, why are they so impressive? Again, because they didn't wait for anyone else. They figured out what they did back when. Regardless of our judgments for or against, that's all besides the point.
Yes. They stood in the river and they said, I am me. and nothing
Yeah,
else.
against the forces. And again, like who do you don't remember, like, for the people who comprise the water, right? Like everyone else just died, right? Like they just got swept away. No one remembers, no one cares, no one wants, look, no one wants to remember, honestly. Look back at a lot of human history and go, God, that's ugly, that's embarrassing. Like, thank God, it's part of history, it's part of who and what we are. But it's like, oh well, because maybe like how fortunate to not be those guys or these guys or those guys or those gals or whoever, right?
Yes. And you can stand in the river, you can float down, or you can swim up, but in the end, you kind of have to do all three in order to even be able to stand in the center.
Yeah. How else would you develop the muscles? How else would you develop the mind?
Yeah.
There really is something. It's not just studying others. Back to the notion of having why rank and order and masters are important. It's that you do have a place to stand, right? Like you have a rail in the meantime until you can stand on your own. You need that rail. Humanity's always needed that rail. It's arguably, it was both maternal and paternal support inevitably. I mean, obviously, okay, by the time human beings took 9 months in the womb, right? Like all the costs that went into that, let's say, by the time, with our big heads and our big brains, by the time, that was a thing, you imagine that, women were already like natural, like we were far past insects at that point, right? We weren't just flinging our youth to the wind, like that they would have been carrying these babies for 9 months, right? In the wilds, that's brutal, right? That they've been doing that for, way before even recorded civilization, right? So by the time we had paternal investment, it's like, well, that was everything. You have 2 caregivers. And then, whatever your tribal or other network out from there and onward to civilizations and up the ladder, where we went from having, our, the animistic spirits to the primitive gods to the pantheons to the like it's just been a process of consolidation and refinement over time to arrive to this point in time. And you see that, okay, does anyone really have an answer? And it's like, wait a minute, no, this is still all up for grabs. Like they don't haven't borne away the key yet. Whatever you could say the problems are here, no one's written the philosophy that solves it. I mean, you could say there are better philosophers than others, but it comes out, because again, back to Nietzsche, it's like, well, he loved his fate. Back to the question of the heaviest burden, and even what this is Emerson's challenge, is throughout his entire, by all accounts, is civilized as these guys were, their accounts of friends and family. It's like, from Nietzsche to Emerson to Thoreau, it's like by, plenty of them were known as, or, even go back to Diogenes. It's like, he wasn't just bristly. Like if you were lying to him, he would be pissing on your leg, right? He wasn't going to put up with it. But it's like, there's a way to do that, It's like, well, because if you masturbate in public these days, you're going to go to jail, right? That's like, and you're going to go on a list, right? The government's going to put you on a list. But Diogenes turned shamelessness into an art, and very, it takes a master to do that. Only a master could do that. Everyone else, it just looks petty. Everyone else, it just looks shameful. Like it's kind of thing that you see and you feel embarrassed for, or that you feel pity for, whether you want to feel that pity or not.
Yeah.
And maybe that's your cue to say, like, hey, son, hey, brother, hey, friend, like, I see that you're struggling, like, you need some help, or, because again, if you have a weakness and you can't see it, who's going to tell you? And it's like, well, if whether, because, Emerson speaks to this in 1841, and you see the same veins running strong today, again, for a nation that prides itself on freedom, that in so many ways Americans are anything but free. Not just to be themselves, but to express themselves even. It's
yourself.
Expressing, and then we've returned again. I told you, express with your full capabilities, you're going to be living in correctional facilities, and it's true. It's always the case, right? We can't let that go unchecked. We can't let it go unchallenged. We have to say, is this the real deal? And by the time it's the real deal, you're like, oh, we already threw him in the lake. And then, we have some tragic story to tell about it. And it's like, well, how many times do we have to do this? Right? Do we just keep doing this over and over again? So far, the answer is yes, obviously, right? Like that hasn't been overcome, that impulse and that. Okay. Here's something about evolution in terms of the balancing of a civilization. How is it that every time ideas recur or ideas occur, that if you have Christianity, it's never content to be one Christendom. We got to have two parties, right? And if it's not, if it's Islam, it's Sunni and Shia, right? And if it's right, no matter where you go, it's like, how is it that we seem to inevitably naturally be divided by temperament and other, right? And, you know, there's a lot of study into this that says politics is temperamental. And if you actually go to Nietzsche's formulations, he says, if we have anything to blame for our consistency, it's likely our temperament and not our principles. And I don't know if Emerson speaks more to Prince, like he asserts that a little bit more, you know, later on in this essay. We'll get to that, I suppose. And you can see that, but it's not like, he also says that it's not like if I was ready to die on this hill yesterday, just because it's another day doesn't mean I'm ready to die on the same hill. Something might have changed, let's say. He doesn't say that, but he doesn't introduce that notion, and it speaks to Nietzsche's notion of you know, one's own virtues ought to be as myriad as your own necessity is, right? Or your own desires are. Like your virtue isn't because your parents said so. Your virtue is because you see something, because you need something, because you want to do something, because you're not afraid of something, right? This is your virtue. Your virtue is that you're willing to open your mouth. Your virtue is that you're willing to, right, have that unpleasant conversation. And again, there's a fine line, because I guess Americans, like you think of something like the Jersey Shore or any of the kind of garbage that comes out of America. And this is what we're kind of known for. Like, I speak the truth. I speak the truth. I'm America. I'm just telling it like it is. And it's like, no, you're telling it like an idiot. But like you see that aspiration is there because it is a very American trait. You know, when it comes to like mass psychosis, you know, we never talk about how, let's say with the Soviets in Russia, or we don't, I guess it's not considered good taste these days, but like you could talk about stuff like what happened in the stupid ages in Europe and what's happening in America now, or any other country where, you know, conflict boils and roils and comes to a head due to both old and new divides. Because like the divides in America, I'd say, they don't just go back to the Civil War, right? They go back to the founding, and they go back to even before coming over here, right? They came over here because they were leaving Europe, right? So we never accepted, or we never accepted, we never fled, right? We never left. We never, like they came over here and they brought themselves, right? We're still here. Like the American, right? It's European liberalism, aka American liberalism, and that's brought us to our present time. And you know, so I don't know what time we got. Is this we got a few more if you want to chop it up, or wait, no, actually, I'm looking at the wrong clock here.
I think it might be good to end it there just before we
wait, let's end on this childhood note real quick. Let's just hammer this home again before we go, because again, I think a camel, lion, child. So it's natural, right? The camel suffers; he has to carry that weight. But again, if we're talking about rank and order, it's a natural part of evolution, right? Before the moth can grow even the eye spots, he's a little caterpillar, and you know he may be naive and he may be prey and he may not sense the world around him, but he's got a sense of vitality about him, right? And that's what Emerson's talking about here, right? Do not think the youth has no force, right? And this is the joke of the proverbial elders always complaining about the proverbial youth, especially when it's like, well, you guys are supposed to raise the youth. So if they are such a problem, who's failure, right? And then you question, well, in the students, when does the spirit itself go wrong, right? Because that backfires too. And it's like, because at what point, you know, what is the world's responsibility? What is yours, right? Like these are really weird lines to draw, and depending on who you ask, it's right. Like, this is just a world of pity, and it's just a world of bad conscience. You know, we all need to save each other, and we all got to be happy in our savedness as we work towards this true world that's going to become a fantasy, or this fantasy that's going to become the true world. So on with the children. Hark! In the next room, his voice is sufficiently clear and emphatic. It seems he knows how to speak to his contemporaries, right? Like, because you don't know how to speak to others doesn't mean that the child does not. You know, you could. Bashful or bold, then he will know how to make us seniors very unnecessary. And this is just always the future. I think about stuff they taught us in school that, again, was like, you know, our teachers were relics before the decade was even up, right? Like they were already out of the past.
Well, that's like Nietzsche right there, who's saying, well, as soon as you form an ideal, it's already a retrograde movement. Right.
Yeah. That's always been one of my favorites, because it's a very important understanding that by the time you're in need of ideal, you're already in troubled waters, right? Like, don't mistake where you're at. Don't mistake who you are, right? Don't mistake what forces are around you and within you. So here we go. Bashful or bold, unnecessary. The nonchalance of boys who are sure of a dinner and would disdain as much as the Lord to do or say ought to conciliate one is a healthy attitude of human nature. So he's not right. You know, this makes me think of Socrates actually, right? Like, I'm not charging you. You're buying me dinner. I'm answering your questions, right?
Yes.
He's a filthy urchin. And why is this aristocrat talking to him? Right, he was a different, and I actually think of this as Nietzsche and the Birth of Tragedy, and he says, like, I don't think maybe he does say Socrates is a child of a new era, but he says he's like the precursor to the new era, right? He's the ideal before, right? Like, someone came along to question things. The nonchalance of boys, and okay, they would disdain as much as the Lord to do or say ought to conciliate one is how the attitude of human nature. A boy in the parlor is what the pit is in the playhouse, independent, irresponsible, looking out from his own corner on such people and facts as pass by. He tries and sentences them on their own merits. In swift summary of boys is good, bad, interesting, silly, eloquent, troublesome. He cumbers himself never about consequences, about interest, right? This is where you get into bravery, because this is what holds everyone up, man, right? Like, now we're away from I'm not reading the quote, right? But this, you see it in people, right? They're constantly worried about, it's like, it's a mental illness to be so obsessively self-conscious. But this is the tricky thing about, I think people don't understand about Americans and American culture, is that, like, there is a very deep sense of not just individualism, but with it a sense of how one's contemporaries and others view each other selves. And it's not just traditions out of Europe and old customs and ideals, but it's also, where it's literally one standing, right? It's literally one standing on the hierarchy. And it doesn't just apply to us, it applies to all primates who don't have complex civilizations like we do, but they feel and deal with it too, right?
Yes.
Just looking at this thing right here, one second, seeing where we want to go with it. Right, not the consequences, not about the interests. He gives an independent, genuine verdict, right? This reminds me of, like, Nietzsche saying a philosopher is a judge. Of course, he points out mankind isn't fit to judge, but you must, this is my favorite. You must court him, he does not court you. This is the big one, right? This is the difference. Like, this is where, I guess, a lot of times when people say philosophy meets the road or application versus not, because I could think, like, there's probably a lot of philosophy majors in America, but in reality, like, you could say plumbers and electricians are actually more necessary to civilization, right?
Yes.
Like, we got a lot of midwits here. Like, we got a lot of middle management, we got a lot of midwits, and there's a problem with midwits, is they're always more common than they think. And they're right. It's like the definition of the midwit is the rule, right? It's the average. Yeah. And smart people and dumb people can agree, but midwits, it's just, they're the ones who are always going like, aha, I see an angle, right? But this is where the Nietzschean respect for power comes in, because you see, it's people just leveraging their power. With the child, it's like, this is the child's power. He's the one who makes the calls. He's the one who makes the shot. He's the creator. He's not dependent on you. He's not interested in what you have to say. You have the old. He's the new. He has the new. He's interested in the new. Like, talk about Nietzsche. Like, he was a child of the new, right? Mm-hmm. He ushered in a new era, if you will. It's a weird. It's both true and untrue to phrase it like that, but you get the gist.
Yes.
Might as well be thus. Like, I look out at this world and I see him in so many places, and in so many places people don't even see it. Like, I would say of Westerners, it's the same difference of Westerners don't understand, just like they don't understand how they're often Greek, Roman, Christian, and all these things in one, and European, let's say, then they also don't understand that there's these other forces in the world.
Yes.
Including Nietzsche and his will to power. And I could also say what he taught us of power, and I'll end on this note. This would be a good spot to wrap it up. If you wanted to learn anything from Nietzsche, it's like how to be a better reader, how to be a more thorough reader, how to understand people and their motives, how to understand human psychology, how to understand mass movements in humanity, right? These weather patterns that play out, in human cultures and civilizations, because, that was Nietzsche's study. And a lot of people come past is to go like, how much of this is clockwork, right? That's the definite, like, it's almost a Zappian like sense of philosophy, right? We could say.
Yes.
Right. In Zapp's questions, he says, we see it until we see it in the eyes of our beloved art itself, and, in step modern nihilism and pessimism. And there we go. I better shut up before, we go on forever. Life goes on into the river with you.
Yes. Life goes on, but sometimes you can stand still in the fray. All right. So that that wraps it up. That wraps part 1 of
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Self-Reliance. I highly recommend reading the whole thing before you return to part 2. If you, the audience, have already read it just like a day ago, then cool, kudos to you. But anyways, we'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening.